Look upward and share the wonders I've seen. John Crichton, Farscape. The Daily Grind, Chapter 143. James walked through the doors of Officium Mundi like he was puppeting his own strings. Arms limp by his sides, legs moving in intentionally deliberate steps that were almost stomps, eyes not really focused on anything. He trailed behind even the new members of the Order that were gawking at their first time. It was about 20 feet in that Sarah dropped back and pressed her shoulder up against his in a familiar motion. "Hey," she said. "You doing okay?" "Eh," James replied listlessly. "I'll be fine." "That's not even close to what I asked." She spoke softly, her voice compassionate but missing a lot of the bombast that she usually used. "What's up? What's going on?" James half shrugged. "Just depression bullshit," he replied. "Making it hard, as always. Kinda worse today than normal." Sarah considered her next words carefully. "I didn't think you'd be depressed today," she questioned, worried eyebrows tilted upward. "What, because it's an adventure?" James thought about making a rude noise, but didn't make the effort. "That's not how depression works," he said, and was a little amused that Sarah echoed the words with him. "I mean, now that you mention it, it is pretty fun watching the new kids see the place for the first time." Sarah gave a hesitant grin that faltered as James just kept unfocused eyes staring face forward. "But seriously, is there anything I can do to help?" "Nope." James tried to say it with a cheerful tone, but got sarcasm by accident instead. It's... He sighed. "It's not about being happy. It's the physically present symptoms of depression making it difficult to walk or taste things, or even for my eyes to dilate properly. It's a lot of little things that make life hard, and the worst part is, I know I should be in a good mood today, but I'm not, so we can add angry, mostly at myself, on top of the pile of problems." Sarah leaned to the side, wrapping an arm around James's midsection in a sideways hug. "I'm sorry. I had hoped that potion JP got for you would have helped more. Or at all, I guess. You want a few hours of nap time? I can just transfer that over to you. I can sleep through tonight's dungeon adventures." "No thanks," James managed to grin. "And I didn't take the potion." "What?" Sarah stepped back, confused. She looked over James's face and realized he was serious. "What?" She glared, crossing her arms. "There's a lot of things..." James didn't get much farther than that before Sarah cut him off. "Oh, did you not duplicate it yet?" "No, we did. Well, we tried to. It doesn't copy properly. The other potions do, though, so..." "Oh, so you're running tests on it somehow?" James turned his head and shot Sarah a look. "No, we've done a chemical analysis on it, among other things that the basement nerds are up to. It's inert, it's non-toxic, it's all sorts of benign." "So you're waiting to..." This time James interrupted her, glowering at his friend. "It appears to be a perfectly safe, one-use, cure-all depression potion. There is no reason for me not to have taken it. Happy?" Sarah wasn't, because even when James admitted that, there was something left unsaid, because there was a reason he wasn't shotgunning the potion like it was an energy drink during finals season. She stared at her friend, who despite everything that had happened was still her best friend, searching his eyes for some hint as to what was going on. Sarah managed about 3 seconds of eye contact before James flinched away and stared at the ground, a guilty expression on his face. "Oh," Sarah exclaimed, and then a second, softer, "Oh, you're afraid." "I mean, the potion looks like an angry dragon corpse glowing with anti-light shoved into a bottle, so you can't really blame me," James defended himself. Sarah shook her head. "No, not like that. You know what I mean." She reached out and grabbed James's hand, folding his fingers between her own. "You're afraid of losing who you are." James looked up, staring at her with hollow eyes. "Can you blame me?" he asked. "I've been this way my whole life. And yeah, it got better when we plucked you out of the dungeon and I learned what was going on. But even though it's getting worse again, it's still part of me. It feels weird to just get rid of it because it's inconvenient." "James," Sarah started and then shook her head. "James, it's not inconvenient. You're standing here in the lobby of a 1,000-mile-long office full of wish-granting magic, and you can barely keep yourself standing. That is not an inconvenience, that is a problem. What's the quote that you repeat to me at least once a month from the back of the book for the Eclipse Phase game? Your body is hardware, upgrade it. Your mind is software, reprogram it. The James started rattling off the quote, mostly on buried instinct. Yeah, that, Sarah interrupted him. We all change. It happens. It doesn't mean you stop being you when you take control of the change happening. James registered Sarah's hands around his own and weakly returned her grip. Have you always been this smart? He asked, with as much of a grin as he could. Yes, she nodded imperiously. That's why we're friends. I'm the brains of the operation. I thought you were the heart, James quipped, some energy seeping through the grim veil around his thoughts. Yes, that too. Sarah nodded more vigorously now. I am lots of parts of the operation. James smiled and squeezed her hand back one last time. Okay, feeling a bit better now. I'll talk to Anesh tonight about the potion. Can we go risk our lives now? It's easier to move when it's life or death. Seriously? Oh yeah, it's how I drive when I'm like this. You absolutely should not drive while you are like this, Sarah admonished. But yeah, let's catch up. You want me to do the introduction speech tonight? James felt a wave of relief wash over him. Please, he thanked her. They moved into the dungeon, and for a little while he walked without having to think too hard about it, limbs light and mind in motion. It wouldn't last forever, but it was something, and it would make it easier to fight back against the black cloud in his head for the rest of the night. Which was good, James thought, because he had a lot to do. Okay, here's the deal. James spoke to a group of 5 different delvers, some old, some new. Anesh had found him a minute ago, presumably prompted by Sarah, and had gotten James to down a half thermos full of the mental sharpening coffee that he'd brought along. It had left him feeling way more capable of taking on the dungeon and interacting with other humans, even if it didn't actually kill the physical symptoms of his depression, like the light not being correct or the coffee not tasting right. It tasted like cough syrup. James wasn't a fan. We're testing this out. You're our first group. Don't grimace at me, Ethan. We already know it's safe. I just don't want to be a lab rat, the young man retorted, giving a dramatic shake of his head that flipped his growing blonde hair around. It's not cool. You're a test group for the program, not for the magic itself, James bit back. So, when you open and read these books, you're going to start a lesson from one of the other dungeons. It'll be an academic topic, and you're expected to learn about it. Fill up the bar, you get a bonus, okay? Nods from everyone, even Ethan. Now here's the thing. These copies, they work like copied orbs. They give you the same lesson, and I mean literally the same lesson. So you're going to have to learn the same 100 points of knowledge to progress. Got it? That means, most likely, you'll want to schedule a time to meet up somewhere and have a study group. Is everyone going to be okay with that, or does anyone need to find a replacement? The 5 selected delvers shook their heads, somewhat eagerly. Every one of them had a slightly different look of excitement on their face. For Ethan, it was something bordering on hero worship. For Mark and Bill, the older blue-collar workers, had a look that was more about just being happy to be part of something. Though that look from them might also be awe of the dungeon that they'd been invited into for the first time. Tyrone looked excited to be back in the magical saddle after months dealing with some family thing out of state, and Dave looked like he was thrilled to be getting a textbook finally. Either way, none of them objected. All right. James handed over the 5 battered copies of what looked like a slightly singed version of one of those Penguin classic books. Hope you all get along, because you're stuck with each other if you ever want this to go anywhere. 30 seconds later, the first official study group of the Order of Endless Rooms had a shared lesson in drama. 0 out of 100 points. Whoa, this feels a lot different than the balls, Mark commented, and then the group started talking to each other while James just stepped back and watched them interact. Talk about what they already knew, what they could learn, what their plan was, and no small amount of speculation on what upgrade choices they might have. James wondered to himself how that would play out, pun mildly intended. How much would this little group focus on their lesson? How much would they specialize? How far would they push the soft cap before they shifted to something else? Would the Order have a whole theater troupe before too long? Would someone be asking him for an extra basement to put on a stage performance in the next month? He honestly kind of hoped so. It would let them test the diminishing returns of the basement orb, too. I've been having a hard time getting used to something, and I think it's causing problems, James confided in Anesh. The two of them were 5 kilometers deep into the dungeon, and were currently snapping locks into place around the 2 bicycles they'd ridden to get here on an efficient timeline. The expansive hallway that James and Anesh had once explored to find an ocean of printer ink at the end was still mostly in place, despite the dungeon changing its structure more often now. But it had a lot more obstacles in it this time for them to contend with, which had made their ride mostly a quiet one. Now, though, James got a chance to talk. They had ridden as far as they could before the ground began to be overtaken by the pen-cap sand of the beach, and there was no way they could ride over that safely. The exercise had woken him up a bit more, and he was feeling pretty okay for the time being. Is this about the potion? Because I noticed... Nope, James cut him off, and a second later cleared his throat and relented. Okay, it could be, and I probably should talk to you about that soon, but no, this is different. Is this going to be about how pants are named? Because it took me a long enough time to get used to the word pants not meaning underwear, and Sarah was talking about... Anesh, please, James lightly chuckled. We're going to get into a fight before I finish my thing. Anesh looked around where they had parked. The cubicle ahead and to their left was half crumbled into the sandy substance that filled the gaps between the pen lids on the shores of the ink ocean. But the other ones around them were still intact, or as intact as deeper dungeon cubicles ever were. All of them were different heights, even as they were all identically gray in color. Some had little overhangs or crenellations around their upper parts. One had a door that would require crawling to get through. Normal stuff, really. I thought this place was safe, Anesh suspiciously commented. We're in a dungeon. James, so far, 1.5 of the dungeons we have found have been safe. James counted on his fingers as he tried to get his impaired brain to work through that logic. Is this the half? Or... No, this is the half. Okay, yeah, fair. My point was, there's monsters everywhere, and the beach shellaxies are actually very angry all the time. I'd be angry too if I had sand in my coolant fan, Anesh nodded. So, anyway, trouble wrapping your head around? The way his partner reintroduced the thing James had been saying made him almost sigh in relief. Anesh did it without thinking, but it took a ton of the anxiety off of James's mind, and right now that was pretty important to him. Right, it's the concept of testing to destruction. I'm tangentially familiar with it, but mostly because we have tech people. Why is it a problem? Anesh asked as the two of them went back and forth, checking each other's armor, unhooking their weapons from the bikes. They kept talking as they started to sweep the cubicles around where they had parked. No sense in not making sure there wasn't something spiky and angry at their exit point. So the idea is, you see how long something works under stressful conditions until it stops working. James didn't have to raise his voice much to be heard through the walls. The office was quiet here, a zone of dead air between the hum of the air conditioners and the crash of the ink waves. It's good for getting to know the limits of things, and also to figure out where you need to work on improving. But... but a lot of our fun stuff is, Hang on. From the other side of the cubicle wall, there was a crunch and then a pained yelp from Anesh before another wet crack of a noise. A portion of the dividing wall cracked slightly and bowed in toward James's head, and he suppressed a snicker as he continued rifling through the filing cabinet before rising back to his feet, just as Nesh continued. Sorry about that. Wanker tried to ambush me. I got 2 ranks in the etiquette of breakups, though. That's... worrying. Don't read too far into it, James told him. I once got skill points in fellatio, and that... Oh, wait. Oh my god, Anesh gasped, and a second later James had to duck as a rubber band ball was lobbed over the wall between them, bouncing wildly before James caught it and set it on the desk. The point is that our stuff is irreplaceable magic, isn't it? Right, James said, heading to the cubicle across the hall. This one looked unoccupied, which was something that didn't happen often, surprisingly. Just an empty desk and a single chair, and a lone picture frame sitting on the desk, ornate gold filigree around its edge. James had a weird feeling about it, so he added it to their pack to check later, before double-checking that there weren't strider nests in the drawers of the desk. And now, we can make copies of small stuff, but not a lot of them, you know? We've more or less maximized the volume, yes, Anesh rejoined James by the bikes. And we're kind of limited on how much mana coffee we can bring in. Why aren't we just teleporting to the towers, anyway? Oh, I figured you'd be up on this. The dungeon erases our landing pad markings, and it won't let us name the towers, so it's very hard to get to them properly. Using the telepads just doesn't do anything. Anesh grabbed the spear he'd leaned up against the bikes and tipped it over his shoulder. So, testing then? He asked, getting a grip on the weapon as James took a sip of water. The spear might have seemed out of place, but this one had an electromagnet and a pretty big battery in it. It was for if they ran into another mainframe, or anything that gave a damn about having its hard drive scrambled for that matter. Oh yeah, James said. We don't take stuff as far as it can go to see where it stops, and we need to, if we ever want to start maximizing things. But that kind of means using the lair or somewhere else we control as a test ground, and it's weird to me. For real, we should be windmill slamming basement orbs until it stops giving us basements. I don't know why it weirds me out so much. Because we need to know how many basements we can get. We should be building a lineup of blue orbs that give good absorb powers. We should be getting everyone to do accelerated strength training with those fucking weird potions JP brought for us, which, by the way, feel really weird to drink and taste awful. You've tried one? I've tried several, James replied. I'm trying to figure out what the limits are, get around my own biases and mental hang-ups. Anesh nodded. This is different than how we've been doing things. What changed? Nothing, James said. Not a fucking thing. He realized he was snarling slightly and brought his expression back under control before Anesh noticed as the two of them started to proceed down the increasingly crunchy hallway on foot. They passed a water cooler, tank cracked open and half full of sandy dust. The cubicle walls around them became more and more crumbled as they walked. At first it was just a little erosion around the tops, but it quickly turned into whole chunks having fallen off, dusty puffs of coarse sand drifting out of decayed holes in the walls as they passed. Anesh stayed quiet, waiting for James to find the words he wanted to use, and keeping his eyes on the mostly empty cubicles around them. There just wasn't much furniture or features around the beach, but that wasn't any good reason to drop your guard. Eventually, they passed a demarcation line. The walls around them rapidly shifted now, from towering 15-foot overhangs to normal-height cubicles to short waist-high walls, eventually down to nothing more than stumbling blocks in the sand. Plant life began to creep in on those surfaces before eventually resigning itself to growing out of the ground itself. Ivy in highlighter yellow and blue and green, vegetation tipped with 100 little blades. The ground underfoot had no sign of carpet anymore, completely overtaken by the rocky pen caps and sandy drifts. Ahead of the duo, miles of beach stretched around a bay of black, inky liquid. The dull roar of waves constantly overlapping and slapping against the shore filled their ears, and the distant breeze of some monolithic AC unit in the far-off horizon tugged at their clothes where the cloth poked out from under the armor. Anesh took a deep breath, and instantly remembered that the ocean here was made of printer ink. By the time he'd finished coughing, and had pulled out and put on a filter mask, James had decided on what he wanted to say. You know how normal we are? He rhetorically asked. He didn't give Anesh time to answer. We're so normal, the fucking FBI wants to be friends with us, James commented flatly. We hang out, talking about building a better world, but even though we've changed, even though we're better, faster, stronger, and more magic, what have we actually done? James looked over at his boyfriend, eyes pleading with dull light. We haven't built anything. We haven't broken anything. We're just doing what we always do. delve this place, say we'll do something nice for the world once we are better, and it's just too easy for me to get so angry about it. James started stalking down the sand, taking a left from where they'd emerged out of the line of cubes and leaving a trail of boot prints behind him. Okay, Anesh said, catching up to his partner. So, first off, shut the fuck up, he opened with, and then grit his teeth as he heard the words his brain had formulated. But still, he powered through. You, personally, are responsible for something like 100 people being alive who otherwise wouldn't be. Maybe 1,000 more if you count the half of a high school that had been turned into compost if not for you. On top of that, you have the Camercondas, which is another 60, 90 people. You're more or less responsible for 2,000 or 3,000 people who've been helped by the response team at this point, too. Ah, James shrugged. It's more than that, though it's not like all those people would have died. Shut up. Again. I know you're feeling like shit today, and I know that you're so much more than what your brain is letting you focus on, but you don't get to pretend you haven't done anything, or that we aren't doing anything. Possibly the only reason the FBI isn't actively trying to shoot you, me, and everyone in the Order is because we have, against all odds, managed to keep the Skulljacks secret up to this point. And if you're itching for a fight, I personally promise at least one police union is going to try to have you, or maybe Harvey, assassinated within a year. Does that make you feel better? Somehow, inexplicably, James blinked and was only a little surprised to find his eyes damp. I just feel useless. I feel like the world is so huge and we can't do anything about it, magic or not. Anesh wrapped his arms around James from behind, stopping his forward walk for a minute as he tried to give the best armored hug he could while still balancing the spear over his shoulder. I know, he said. Seriously, I know. But we'll just keep trying until something gives, okay? Okay, James started to say with a shaky grin. He marshaled some of his mental strength and began to pull himself together. Which is when the sand to their right, toward the black ocean of ink, exploded upward in a fountain of plastic and dust, and a shalaxi the size of a small pony burst through the debris to lunge toward them. James reacted so fast he wasn't even sure what he was doing until a split second after it had happened. As the rectangular hardware maw approached, he shrugged hard, pushing Anesh off of him and back a couple of steps. Without missing a beat, he slammed his hands together on the pebbled metallic sides of the creature that had literally jumped at the chance to eat his face. It was too big to arrest all its forward momentum, but James was stronger than he looked, and, as a bonus, he'd been working out, alchemically packing months of exercise into a couple of days. Still, instead of trying to hold the overweight, aggressive computer in place, he pivoted and body slammed it onto the beach in a spray of grit. In that moment, the mask suddenly seemed like the smartest idea he'd ever had, even if some of the sand did spray into his eye. James rolled away from the creature's thrashing cords and chomping teeth, and started to draw his handgun when Anesh interjected. His partner had stepped back and fetched the spear from where he dropped it in the sand, and now he thrust it forward as hard as possible with the weapon braced under his armored arm. As hard as possible wasn't quite enough to do more than poke a half-inch of the blade into the metallic chitin of the shalaxi, which instantly started thrashing to try to lunge at Anesh next. But the young man stayed calm, kept the point in their enemy, and flicked a switch on the haft of the spear. The internal battery connected, cycled, and then dumped as much power as possible into the electromagnet built into the spear's point. There wasn't any fanfare, just a clearly artificial popping sound, the feeling of something off in the air, and then the shalaxi going limp before toppling over. Good job, James told Anesh, standing up and dusting himself off. I feel better now, he added. I'm almost certain that's adrenaline. Anesh was gasping for breath while James looked perfectly collected. Also, piss. What's wrong? It died mostly intact. The orb dropped inside it, Anesh complained. James almost laughed, but chose to just pat Anesh on the shoulder instead in reassurance. It's fine. I'll get this one. You okay? I'm fine. Let's grab the orb and get to the tree, yeah? With a noise of agreement, James got to work. They didn't get ambushed the rest of the way to the decision tree they were here to visit, though they did see something breach the waves a couple of miles out from shore. It didn't look like a whale, but it clearly had similar dimensions, even from this distance. Anesh caught James's attention and pointed as the creature rose out of the waves around where a flock of paper was gliding over the ocean. The two of them watched as the thing repeatedly rose and fell below the waves beneath those distant specks. Then, just when they were about to turn away, 100 black lines exploded out of it like needles, spearing dozens of the pieces of paper that flew around it. From this far away, they could just barely see its back open up to reveal some kind of fleshy interior, which the paper birds fell into by the score, before the creature sealed itself back up and dove again, this time not resurfacing. Well, that was fucked up, James stated. New plan. Let's never go in the water, Anesh added. It's ink. Even more reason. Anesh threw his free hand into the air, turning to continue, this time with a bit more of an angry stalk to his walk toward the decision tree. The exchange rates had gotten worse. They traded 100 yellow orbs for 8 purples, resigned to the bad deal, and headed back. There was still plenty of time left tonight, and they planned to copy and test all of these for armory candidates before the delve was over. The glowing, angular shapes of the monitor lizards on the tree waved goodbye to the two delvers in unison as they both headed back away from the decision tree toward their bikes. The small green and clear plastic creatures shifting themselves back and forth, undoubtedly planning to gorge on the extortionate price they had extorted from the delvers. You ever feel like bringing anyone in here for a vacation day? James asked as they left. You know, have a beach episode? Anesh wiped furiously at a splatter of ink that had gotten onto his cheek from the ocean. No, he said. This place sucks. +3 skill ranks. Drive, car, Honda Civic. +2 skill ranks. Programming, C++. +1 skill rank. Fishing. +1 skill rank. History, Metallurgy, South America. +1 skill rank. Construction, Home, Wall. James nodded to himself as he cracked the singular large yellow orb, the feeling of new knowledge filling the corners of his mind both familiar and yet perpetually novel. He was helping Momo and Daniel with a run to one of the water cooler caves. Bill, the more burly and less tired of the two more mature men who'd come in with them, was also tagging along for experience. Things were going pretty well so far, honestly, which was how James was choosing to phrase the fact that they had only gotten into a few life-or-death fights. Also, he had been very clear this time on the fact that Daniel was not allowed to ask Pathfinder to use her ability to seek out a goal tonight. He was tired, and while he was starting to put his mental fortress back together, James was well aware of the fact that he had 0 patience for misadventures on this delve. They had just ambushed a group of stuffed shirts that had been blocking the way forward. Where possible these days, James liked to avoid being the aggressor in fights in this dungeon. But the stuffed shirts were hostile basically 100% of the time. The fight had been mostly one-sided, with Bill shaking off his anxiety at an actual battle just in time to rescue Daniel from having his throat crushed. At the end of it, they had 3 yellow globes and 3 piles of shredded cardstock. The team had moved on while debating who got the orbs, which had led to a long tangential conversation about the difference between green and yellow life. Bill still had some questions, and the rest of them had some wild speculation to hand off to him. The main difference, Momo had said, is that the dungeon owns green orb life, as long as, it's here. It seems to not work outside since the Camercondas are cool in the lair. Wait, Camercondas are green? Daniel asked, eyebrows up. Oh yeah, absolutely, Momo nodded. Actually, how do you not know that? Didn't you? Whatever. We're not really sure what the variations in life types actually are, though. Right, James? She waited for an answer. and only got a nod before continuing. Yellows act like, well, wildlife. Greens are the agents of the dungeon, but sometimes they leave the dungeons and keep working for it. We're pretty sure things like the illipedes are red life, but we haven't actually killed any, so we don't know. And I'm not about to either. Those things are nice. Oh, and then infomorphs, which are purple. Right, Path? Momo elbowed at the space around Daniel in a friendly way. Not even close, Daniel informed her. A shimmering orange mirage in the shape of a distant feather flaring to life over his right shoulder, briefly showing off Pathfinder's physical position. Well, whatever, Momo grumbled. Anyway, stuffed shirts are weird. Weird how? Bill asked. Weird because they're the only ones we've ever seen drop either a green or a yellow, James answered. Also, Momo didn't say this, but we don't know how the red life is different from all the yellow life, or how it relates to the dungeon in terms of taking orders or not. Yeah, these ones are yellow, so they're skills, right? Bill asked, tossing one up and down, the melon-sized ball not looking quite so large in his huge hand. You guys copy these? Like the ones you gave us when we signed on? Oh, hell no, James shook his head. It'd be cool if we could, obviously. If we found one that gives a big batch of skill points and a whole bunch of different useful things, I'd consider it. But they're huge. Fitting one of these in the projector basically means that we're giving up copying 30, maybe 40 smaller orbs. And with how many people we have now, the smaller ones are just more useful and more efficient almost every time. This led to more questions about where life came from. Everyone had to admit they didn't really know. In theory, they were aware that you could use a yellow to create life in anything that didn't already have it, but the Order had been holding back on going too nuts with that. Life needed to eat, and oftentimes what it needed, even if it could supplement its diet with mundane materials, was more orbs. Camercondas were actually a very lucky outlier that they could survive entirely on human food. The dungeon probably made orbs, somehow. Life in here, almost certainly, made more life. The little stapler crabs often had that kind of look that like they'd been put together a little haphazardly. It was entirely possible that their nests were all started by one strider with a pile of orbs, a desire for a family, and some determination. No one had ever witnessed it directly, but they all knew that yellow life could make more yellow life. After all, Rufus had made Ganesh so long ago. Yeah, the paper pusher thing confuses the shit out of me, James admitted. Like, do the green ones make subservient yellow ones? Or are they both just made for different reasons? What determines it? He shrugged. The green ones seem to be able to take over other dungeon life they come across. They always whip up strider swarms around them. Maybe it's a promotion, Daniel asked. What? Like, the yellow ones get promoted to managers and then they become green orbs? He sheepishly suggested. I mean, a lot of the stuff around here doesn't map perfectly to actually working in an office, but, like, these things are shaped like employees, right? Huh. James made a motion somewhere between a nod and a shrug. I mean, it's the best theory so far, he said. It's probably something way more sinister, though. Oh, here's a fucking weird thing. These guys all have names. Momo jerked back, dropping the orb she had been doing basketball tricks with. Wait, what? She asked, letting it fall into their cart. Yeah, we've scanned a dozen or so of them with an illipede. The paper pusher orbs always read as people's names. James let out a long breath of air. Man, the first time that happened, I actually threw up. The names are apparently random, though. They don't line up to anyone who's gone missing or died, even though coincidence is going to make at least one name match somewhere. So, after a few more comments and questions chased the conversation in familiar circles, Bill asked something that most new people eventually asked. What do the paper pushers do? Lots of things. James gave a small nod to a passing strider walking on the cubicle walls. Sometimes they're delivering mail or messing with the computers. The real ones, not the Shalaxes. Sometimes the green ones go out into the real world and try to kill people. No idea why they do that, but we're getting pretty good at stopping them. Sometimes they're acting like fantasy novel bandits. They'll block off paths with walls of rolling chairs and ambush anybody who comes by. Other times they just sit at desks and stare straight ahead and don't move unless somebody bothers them. So they're not people? Bill seemed concerned. I think they're kind of like everything else here. They could be people, or they could be, I mean, monsters, even though I don't like the word. It's kind of up to the individual. Oh, Momo chimed in. Sometimes they wear faces. Like the masks. They wear the masks like faces, and it doesn't look any different until they tear them off and throw them at you. Masks? The sticky note things? Bill asked. Yep. We never came up with a clever name for 'em, Momo lamented. Got any suggestions? Nah, I'm not a word guy, Bill replied. Besides, I don't know what they do. Try to eat your face, mostly. Daniel sheepishly added his voice to a small lull in the conversation. If you want, in my head, I keep calling them the Masks of Amontillado. Oh, that's fucking great, Momo beamed at him, giving a light clap with her fingertips. James, got anything? I was going to suggest Flair Mache, but while that is easier to say, Daniels is kicking my ass by virtue of being on theme and a really obscure reference. Also, they're not paper mache at all. James sketched a bow toward the other Delver. Good job. You are officially one of us now. Wait, that's the requirement? Momo exclaimed in horror, even as Daniel looked like he was legitimately trying to hold back a tearful smile. I'm so bad at puns. I'm never going to be part of the in-group. No, it's fine. I'll name... Whatever bad idea Momo was going to propose was shot down by the cluster of feral striders that had been attracted by the yelling, throwing themselves over the top of the cubicle walls, aiming for skulls and vital organs. Even with Bill letting out a high-pitched yelp and tumbling backward at the surprise of it, the team cleaned up the ambush in less than a couple of minutes. +1 skill rank, fabrication, light bulbs. +1 skill rank, math, statistics. Slightly smarter, James moved on with the rest of the group, occasionally having to stop to find an alternate path for the carts they were hauling with them, but mostly making consistent progress toward the cave they were looking for. James lapsed into silence, mostly keeping an eye on the skies overhead, and letting Momo field questions from the new guy. When they eventually decided to draw straws for who got the orbs, he won one of them. That was why they had lightened the cart slightly. When they'd reached the water cooler cave, the operation went off without a hitch. The pinpricks, still unfortunately magnetic, were swept up and pinned in a corner while the group quietly pulled more silver and magic programming devices out of the walls. Mostly quietly, anyway. Bill kept trying to make up mining songs to pass the time, and then mostly quietly became raucously after Momo got over being nervous and started trying to join in. As it turned out, for all the things that Momo was, being on key was not one of them. On the way out, James stopped to take a few pictures on his phone. One of the tanks, those crystalline growths out of the ground and walls that seemed to slowly fill with pure water, wasn't full of water at all. It was near the entrance, and he hadn't spotted it on the way in. Now that he saw it as they passed by to leave, he had a spike of anxiety about the singing that they'd been doing. The tank wasn't empty. It was full of something else, but it certainly wasn't water. Something red and black that twisted around in slow spirals like the storms of Jupiter. The tank was only half full, but as James paused to frown at it and make a record, just in case someone had seen it before, he saw another drop of liquid fall from the ceiling and slide perfectly into the mouth of the tank, adding to the substance. Was it something growing? A poison waiting to erupt? Was it alive and watching them? It looked mean, but that didn't really mean anything around here. Was this just the dungeon finally being sick of their presence? What's that? Bill asked, nudging James out of his anxious speculation. Nothing good, I bet, James sighed, pocketing his phone. Well, not his phone, but a phone. He'd learned his lesson after the third time he had to replace his phone due to unforeseen combat damage, but he still wanted a way to take photographs and use the Wi-Fi in here, So the Order had acquired a bunch of copies of a mid-grade smartphone that they used for Officium Mundi operations and nothing else. Alright, let's go. Time for the hard part. Hauling everything back? Yep. James nodded at the older man as they ascended the ramp to where Daniel and Momo were struggling to Tetris the pieces of silver into the carts. Ah, toughen up, kid. Bill somehow managed to sound friendly and not condescending at all when calling James kid, which was new. Manual labor builds character. And muscles. He flexed one of his biceps with a toothy grin. His smile had a gap in it, but his logic didn't, so James grinned back. Yeah. The fact this is paying for half of your salary probably helps too, huh? Your salary too, right? Bill nudged at him again. James doesn't get paid, Daniel cut in, swearing slightly as he dropped one of the larger pieces and nicked his finger open. Fuck, ow, hand me the band-aids. I'm busy, Momo growled back, pushing with both arms and her whole body to roll a 70-pound hunk of silver into the side of the cart. Bill stepped over and added a hand to her effort, letting Momo direct while he applied a professional amount of force, easily sliding the material into a securely wedged position. Why doesn't he get paid? He whispered to Momo and Daniel. Is he being punished or something? What? No, I don't get paid either, Momo shrugged. Yeah, and Karen complains about it every time I turn in my receipts to her, Daniel told the girl in the silver-studded armor. Momo made a rude noise with her lips. I don't need cash. He doesn't either. There's no reason to care, right? Stop talking about my finances and let's get moving, James called over to them. He had a boot placed on a tipped-over shalaxi that had wandered into the clearing around the cave while the three of them had talked. It had tried to bite him, but it was kind of lethargic about it, and James wasn't going to put in the physical effort to kill something that didn't really seem to be trying to do the same back to him. Come on, I'm feeling better, and I want to test all the purples Nesh duplicated to see if any of them break society. Is he always like this? Bill asked his new coworkers about his apparent employer. Pretty much, Daniel was still smiling. Sure, their leader was a bit weird, but he was too. After all, he was one of them. Anesh had worked his magic, which was actually the magic of anyone who could follow the directions on the bag of a ritual coffee, and had a duplicate run of all the purple orbs collected that day. 8 from him and James, 2 from Alex's group that had caught a paper pusher pack off guard and managed to get the orbs from them before they got turned into hostile memes. He hadn't wasted space, and so had filled the remainder of the case that was being duplicated with vials of the exercise maximization potion. Those things were shockingly powerful for anyone willing to put in the work. And Dinesh wasn't just saying that because his boyfriend had developed 2 months' worth of muscle overnight. It wasn't that he liked abs or anything, but if James had abs, Dinesh wasn't going to complain. He just didn't need to finish this line of thought right now. The 10 copied orbs were distributed and tested, the Order collectively searching for anything they would want to make 1,000 more of and spread around their organization and beyond. At some point in the evening, Anesh had been made aware that the old gun had been spotted again, and was intensely aware of just how outclassed they were by whatever that thing was. They needed every purple orb they could get, every possible edge, and everyone was largely in agreement about that. There was a grim calculus to their explorations these days, even as they all took part in the wonder of seeing new parts of the office or finding new incredible magic. There was an enemy out there, one that was at least partially aware of them, one that could probably kill them all without trying if she wanted to. They needed to be ready, or at least prepared to do some damage on the way out. Anesh himself took 1 purple orb, getting something entirely reasonable and not at all useful for fighting a god. Shell upgraded. Radiation resistance. 120 rads per day negated. It put him further on the road to being an exceptional space-based life form, but it wasn't instantly useful. Still, he noted down the effect and saved the original for later. James got given 2, as a way of Anesh trying to cheer him up, Never mind that he had arrived in good cheer anyway. It was important to do nice things for people you cared about. And what James had gotten was a little more bombastic. Shell upgraded. -1 cancer per year. Shell upgraded. Elbow joint. Range of motion. +26 degrees. James was excited over the combat potential of the second one in hand-to-hand fights. Everyone, especially including James, was excited over the prospect of no more cancer. Ever. They didn't have Wikipedia in here, but they did have a medical student and some roughly remembered statistics that informed everyone that this probably was the first step on the path to true biological immortality. James got even more excited after hearing that. Not that he wasn't before, but if his excitement had been a 7 out of 10, now it was firmly clocked in at a nice solid 11. The best part was, they could run off 60 copies of this orb per replicator ritual. They had to build up to it first, but they'd get there. And while there were hundreds of thousands of cancer patients in the world, and they'd never be able to get them all, a person only had to crack the orb once to be given a near-perfect immunity to one of the worst scourges humanity faced. If they moved fast enough, bit by bit, they could immunize everyone. They'd never be fast enough, but they could focus on this. They could do it. Change the world forever. Compared to that bombshell, the upgrades to lactose intolerance, or vision range, or water storage, or improved fertility that the others got just didn't seem that important. Anesh noted them all down anyway, though, especially the one that Ethan got, that simply read, Shell upgraded, -1 broken bone per month. That was absolutely one that he was willing to go with James on in testing to destruction. Probably not on Ethan, though. Given how excited the kid was, it was possible he'd already triggered the damn thing, kicking the floor and seeing if his foot stayed intact. The Order had, in the last hour of delve time, congregated around the tower they used as a home base. Small conversations, tired smiles, and an overall feeling of accomplishment filled the air. It had been, all things considered, a very good day. They used their spare time before they moved out to clean armor, stock equipment properly, and just lounge around on couches made out of lines of padded chairs. Or, for a few people, to leave early and head to the bathrooms. The time dilation meant that the rest of the group would catch up to them almost instantly from their perspective, but it was still a way of calling dibs and also not spending another hour needing to use the bathroom. But as the minutes ticked by, there was still one person missing. Simon still hadn't arrived back at the tower. A quick roster check showed that he had made the choice to go off hunting on his own tonight, a proposition that was so absurdly dangerous in a building that had hostile cameracondas in it that James had wasted several minutes swearing, creatively and loudly. They'd begun organizing rapid search parties, throwing noise and caution to the wind, and were prepared to storm down the path that their missing hunter had taken when the young man had limped back into the fortifications. His armor had been savaged, chunks snapped off in some spots, melted away in small dots in others. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead and was favoring his left leg. If he had taken a backpack or a weapon, he had left it somewhere deep in the office. Behind him, he led two serpent-shaped forms on leashes made out of paracord. A pair of cameracondas, one, James noticed, wearing the missing backpack over its head like a hood. The other with a suit jacket and ample duct tape forming a similar kind of mask. Neither of the puppet cameracondas could see, and therefore use their immobilizing power. They looked, it seemed, about as battered as Simon himself. Simon started dryly before coughing repeatedly until someone got him a bottle of water. He thanked them and tried again. I don't know if they're prisoners or refugees or what, but you're probably going to want to teleport them into a secure room, he said. He almost took a seat, but Sarah calling out a 5-minute warning got everyone moving pretty fast. They still didn't want to be trying out what it was like to survive in here for a week, cut off from the outside world. They could always teleport out, but doing that didn't feel very good. We'll talk about this later, James said. For now, let's go. Everyone move. Come on, orderly lines. You know the drill. We practiced this. They had practiced it over and over. Once out, they only had about 20 minutes before the building's camera system would come back on. So far, somehow, mostly thanks to the pandemic, they had continued to avoid being detected by the management or ownership of James's old workplace. And tonight wasn't the night they wanted to break that streak. 20 delvers, and 2 hopefully future liberated Camerondas, left the seemingly infinite expanse of Officium Mundi, and stepped back into the real world of Earth. It had been a good night.